Charlotte, welcome. It is such a privilege to be able to chat with you about your work. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about your movement practice and what inspired you to do your particular movement practice.
Oh, whoa. You mean like from the beginning of my training or what I do now? Do you have
What you do now, let's go from there.
okay. Um oh wow. I suppose I could go to my earliest influences. I was thinking about this as a choreographer. I mean, the thing that I'm most excited about as a dancer, teacher, choreographer is choreography. I just love getting in studios with, with dancers, um, and becoming lost in that creative process. Um, I started choreographing really early before I even really knew what I was doing, but I did see great works. Like, I had influences from, oh, Pilobolus was an early one that I liked, and I did, that's what I think my partnering, skills developed. But, later on then, people like Paul Taylor and Twyla Tharp, um, um, and then Bill T. Jones and earlier people that I had seen just had a huge influence on me that I saw at the American Dance Festival. Um, Martha Clark, I saw her, years ago. And so those influences have, you know, they have stuck with me, I think, from a really early time and influenced the work that I do. And then I think thinking of a choreographic process, I feel like one of the breakthroughs I had in work is workshops that I did with Liz Lerman, using text, any kind of text at all, things that I generate was what I started with by free writing, and utilizing that as a jumping off point, particularly for movement generation. Um, yes, so.
How might you describe your movement?
Oh boy, let's see. My technical background tends to be a more lyrical style that probably comes from my study of fall and recovery technique with Humphrey Lamone teachers. However, the movement itself sometimes has been described as quirky. Um, I guess it depends on the subject matter I'm taking on. I feel like I hope that I'm drawing on a range of movement qualities and ideas. Sometimes it's hard to evaluate one's own movement style. Um,
Well, then let's jump to your inspiration through T.S. Eliot,
okay.
and specifically analyzing that, what it was about that poem that inspired you to make a movement work.
Well, I was introduced to T.S. Eliot, oh God, years and years ago. And the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock was the one that just really hit me. And I'm honestly not a great lover of poetry. Um, I, yeah, but there was something about this particular poem that really grabbed me. And I, it's the images and that arise and the depth of the language and the descriptions and um, this sense of memory that jumps out at me. And I haven't studied the poem in terms of other people's interpretations. It was always something that I would just read. I would read it over and over and over again. So it felt very familiar. And there were images that I created from it that have stuck in my head forever. And so when I don't know, I was reading something, I think online, possibly in the New Yorker, I don't know. Or something else where the poem jumped out. And I was like, oh God, I want to use this. I want to use this as a jumping off point for a piece.
It was astoundingly evocative, especially in your choice of music and accompaniment,
Mhm.
because the music also would travel in time in a
Yeah.
beautiful way. Can you talk about that?
Well, what I did, this, the poem really puts me in a place, like a place, a time period. And it was written in 1915. And I thought, I just had this idea that, you know, what were people listening to back then? What was the music of that time? So I just, you know, searched, and I didn't stick specifically, like I went into the 20s a bit, the 1920s as well. But you know, Debussy was writing in the, you know, around that period of time. Irving Berlin, you know, Charles Ives. The jazz that I included, like Bessie Smith, um, Louis Armstrong, King Oliver, those are a little bit later, because the jazz of that period in the teens, I wasn't really fond of. It was still, it didn't quite have the soul of it the way I like it, you know, that I gravitate towards anyway. So I kind of went to the 20s, you know, to search out that. Um, and I had heard music by that I recalled from when I was very young. My parents listened to the Ink Spots, and so and then I discovered that was Irving Berlin. You know, so I had a really good time listening to lots of different music from that period primarily, and then that led to working with Margaret Wank Kuchelbauer. I hope you can edit that. Margaret Wank Kuchelbauer. Um, that we talked about that time period. So it became, you know, a real focus for the look of it, the costumes for it. I thought she did an incredible job, you know, giving costumes a sense of that time period, though not totally of that period. You know, it's she uses elements of it, as she often does with her, you know, her costume design that suggests that time. So I think the whole thing, plus the lighting design by Laurel Shoemaker, I think all adds into, you know, that sense of memory, a time past. You know?
You have an exercise that you do with your dancers where they write and they choose specific words from their writing. Could you talk about that?
I will. Um, so often what I'll do in a choreography class is I'd like, I think our best work can come from things that we know deeply, that we have, that we've experienced. Not necessarily, you can do research beyond what one knows, but I think for young choreographers who think they need to do big works on big subjects, you know, your own personal experience can relate to the larger collective, you know, this. So I have them free write on some topic. I might even say, you know, in our first choreography class, I want you to write about, like, you're telling a story about an experience you had this summer when you were, you know, over summer break. And so I time them and just have them write. And they're not allowed to take pen from the paper. They have to just keep writing whatever comes into their head. And that kind of free writing, I think, taps into a deeper sense of the experience sometimes, where it might really stray from the actual story they begin telling, but it gets down into layers of the self that I hope that will tap into things. And I talk about describing the experience. So once I give them a time limit of 3 minutes or something, and then they go back, and then I'd like them to look at it and then circle words or groups of words that seem to hold the essence of the story they just wrote. And then say we circle 10 of those words or groups of words, then I tell them to create a movement word, or just a tiny movement, a piece of movement with several movements in it that seem to capture the feeling of that word or group of words. and then we end up stringing them together. So what we start with is, we're movement words that then get get changed into movement phrases that become the material that a choreographer can work with. And I hope that by talking about the essence of the words, or that they are able to capture that in movement in some way. So that's just a beginning point.
Can you take us further? What would be an end point?
Okay, well, yeah, and that's the hard part, but once you have good material, and we talk, good material that seems to delve in a bit, what I like about this process of using words, it gets students out of this idea that they have to make movement with, borrow their technique movement, but they'll come up with the oddest, most interesting, which to me is the greatest compliment, to have odd movement and something very different. And hopefully it's captured some essence. So for example, in the T.S. Eliot work, once we might generate, there's so many beautiful, words within the T.S. Eliot poem that I just circled. But overall then if you develop material that seems to really jump off the idea that the writing was taken off of, for example, the T.S. Eliot poem, I'm then going deeper into that and trying to create larger images. And so that's where, I'm wanting to capture a time period. I'm thinking about memory. How does memory work? That memories overlap. Like you might be somewhere in the present and you go back, and then that memory leads to some other thing. And so what I did within this work was the music. I'll start with a piece of music, but the music might come and go, and you might hear it again later, the way memories do, like they end up cross-referencing one another. And so the piece, there's something about that, like the reoccurrence of memory in the poem to me, and it may just be my interpretation, which is fine, that becomes central to the work, central to the choreography itself. And from that, I actually work such that I create different sections of a work. I don't usually work linearly, because I'm experimenting with music. I don't come with music. I have a huge playlist of all this music I just talked about. And then I end up trying different things. So I let the movement be primary. And then I'm looking for, music has such a huge influence on choreography that it can make or break a work. And so I have to be, I'm trying to think about what it is overall I'm trying to present in this work, or any work. And then hopefully making decisions that end up being coherent and have a purpose that weaves through the whole thing, and leads to an end, I hope that got you.
That's helpful. Could you address one specific section that you created, which is like a series of tableaus?
Oh, yes. I actually, in two sections it happens. There is this beautiful section that maybe I could just read for a minute. Oh God, there's many things in here. Let's see. There's the yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains. Let us fall upon its back, the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once around the house and fell asleep. So there are so many incredible images and ideas in that. So in one section, it begins with a tableau. There's 3 dancers in one section of the stage and 4 in the other. And I later use this idea of photos, like an old photograph. They start still, and then their movement was created from these images, from these words, muzzled, lingered, I have a bunch of them back here. curling, fall, slip, sudden leap, rubbing. I mean, those are just wonderful. Like we talked about smoke, you know, or the fog. Um, and so that's how we created the movement. And then I put dancers together and I create partnering out of what they've done. Or I just have them do their phrases in groups. And then I see what, you know, how they relate. And because it's similar material, though created by different dancers, it ends up having a sense of cohesion. And so what I do is I have the lights come up on one group, they move, then the lights come up the other group stills. And so we go back and forth that way. And so it creates a tableau I hope feels almost like old photographs, you know. And then the idea of the photographs, there is a section in here where we feel like we're in a dance hall, which actually is not from the poem. But there's this idea of youth and experiences out in the city, you know, in part of this, this kind of a nightlife feeling. And I ended up using the King Creole and Louis Armstrong music. And so what I did, I specifically took photographs of old dances, and they're just these different shapes there. And in the central section, there's a kind of it's a funny duet. It's humorous. It adds something new to the piece that I felt like it needed. And so I literally had the dancers make these partnered shapes taken from these old photographs. I have, I don't know, 50 of them. And then we linked those all together into movement and partnering phrases. So that's not necessarily a tableau, but it borrows from that idea of old photographs that arises in that earlier section. So.
That's lovely, really beautiful.
And it's a great technique for creating movement.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's terrific. Can we now jump to a bathtub?
Sure. What would you like to know about the bathtub?
What inspired you to make Canciones?
You know, first a dancer that I was working with, Michelle Kreiner, and I had read a short story in the New Yorker by Allison Rose called The Summer Indoors. It was back when the Shouts and Murmurs section was always in the back, and there was a short story. Shouts and Murmurs have become these kind of funny things now, but this was a delightful, you know, very short story. And again, the images and the words popped out to me, and I just recently learned, you know, utilize this technique that Liz Lerman introduced to me. I mean, I made this piece in 1999 initially. So Michelle and I got in the studio, and I literally just took the words from that writing. It's about a woman who's in a New York apartment in the summertime when it's really, you know, August, when it's really hot. And I imagine she's got one of those, you know, old apartments where the tub is actually in the kitchen, you know. And but I didn't think about a bathtub initially, but she doesn't like all the flesh that's shown in the summertime on the streets, you know. So she jacks the AC up really, really high, and then she wears a coat indoors. And in the midst of that, she also has these memories, has a sense of melancholy to it, but it also has a humorous feel. And there's a sense of a relationship in there. I didn't pull it out before I talked to you today, but I just thought the images again would create great movement. So initially I just had movement phrases created. And as we were working on the piece, I thought, because part of it takes place in a bathtub, I think she's, I don't know, drinking martinis or gin and tonic in the tub, and talks about having done this with partners, you know, years ago or at some point. And I thought, a bathtub. And my landlady at the time had an old clawfoot tub in her garage. And so I asked her if I could use it. So, oh my God, this bathtub has followed me literally around the world at this point. And not that tub, but bathtubs in general. So the tub became this really central part of it. And the tub part um, became like the crux of it. It's this beautiful, um, the music is wonderful. It's an old canción, canción, that's a love song. Being from Tucson, I really love music from Mexico. And that this was a song that Ry Cooder did of Sam Samudo's, which is an old love song. And something about that melancholy in the bathtub and this story about this woman in a New York apartment really rang true for me. So I actually created the movement for outside the tub first, and then we went back into the tub. And it has it has a sense of humor, but then I also am going for something, a depth of, melancholy and loneliness, I think, too, that I hope comes across in the work. It's in 3 parts.
Well, it's really quite lovely. And I was going to invite you to give an assignment to the students with the bathtub, but perhaps we'll just let them do that themselves.
Okay. Actually, it's not a bad idea. I was going to use it for a new idea with doing an iPhone video that I thought might be good, but I haven't undertaken that yet. So one could have great fun in a bathtub, I think, with an iPhone.
Charlotte, this has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing your work with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to do it.
Well, thank you. And we will, perhaps the students will reach out to you.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks, George.
Thank you.
Good luck, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So within the T.S. Eliot piece, there's a section that I think of as like the crux of the work, and it's actually a solo. And there's a sense to me in the poem of a young man, because he wrote this when he was a young man, T.S. Eliot did, but he looks into the future when I feel like when he's older, and I grow old, I shall wear the bottom of my trousers rolled. And there's a sense of realizing one's mortality, in the future. And there's a sense of fear almost, or a little bit of sense of dread, but also a beauty in that as well. And so the solo to me is more like the voice of the poet in that, the soloist, and then there's, as that leads into the ending of the work, where there's the mermaids singing, and there's a sense of the ocean and the waves. And I have seen, I've heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. I have seen them riding seaward on the waves, combing the white hair of the waves blown back. When the wind blows the water white and black, we have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by sea-girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown. And I just, Debussy, there's a piece that I discovered, recommended by Joseph Norman. And no, I suppose it was Joshua Marquez. That's who I was working with at that time. And so you get the sense of the rolling sea, and I'm partnering in there, like the mermaids floating above, the group, and it builds and swirls. It was the most difficult part of the whole piece to make. It was just because people are doing lots of different things to get this rolling effect. But as we come to the end, the poem itself feels like it almost comes full circle in a way. And so what I do is I go back to the original opening moment of the piece, where dancers are passed overhead, and we reverse that completely, so the dancers actually roll the other way. And then as the music is ending, the one dancer just slides down the body, and it has a sense of dying, of receding upstage, and the lights go out and someone, people are rolling upstage, but then a dancer is sliding down into the group like it would be the sea. So I thought that might be interesting to choreographers and writers as well.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. That's really
You're
terrific.
so welcome. Okay.